You've probably heard of non-competology.
Now, I've studied all the religious figures of the world. My conclusion is they're all pretty cool. They're not as cool as me.
Well, whatever you've heard, if you haven't heard it from us, I can assure you, we are not what you'd expect.
As a young man, I asked myself the question, why? Why all this? What up with that? What? And I found the answer. And I'll tell you the answer. In exchange for a great deal of money.
Non-competology is taking the world by storm.
It's not that you are a ghost, you see? It's that you're filled with ghosts. You're filled with ghosts inside your brain.
So take a look and then decide for yourself. Non-competology. Fuck with it.
Hi, I'm EJ. Welcome back to NonCompete. In our last video, we discussed how the Trump administration's mishandling of the Epstein case functioned as a loyalty test for the MAGA cult. A lot of viewers in the comments argued that this could not have been a loyalty-building maneuver because a lot of conservatives are very angry about this Epstein situation, and some people are even saying that they're leaving the MAGA movement. In fact, in a watershed moment for the hashtag resistance, the orange Cheeto, the mango Mussolini, Drumpf himself got ratioed on Truth Social. He got ratioed on his own platform. And in the mind of a liberal, ratioing somebody on the internet is the closest thing you're ever gonna get to a revolution. I mean, look, this guy burned his little MAGA hats. That doesn't seem like a very loyal thing to do. Well, let me quickly clarify. First of all, intentionality doesn't matter. It's entirely possible for loyalty tests to emerge naturally from cult structures. So whether Trump planned this Epstein situation or not is irrelevant. What matters is that it's forcing MAGA members to choose to double down on cognitive dissonance or risk being purged for disloyalty. So far, from what I'm seeing, most MAGA cultists are choosing to defend Trump even harder, even if many of them are willing to go after sacrificial figures like Pam Bondi.
This is all Pam Bondi. That's mass incompetence. Mass incompetence. She should be fired. People are like, well, that's Donald Trump. That's because his name is in it. No, it's not. If you believe Donald Trump, the guy has models hanging off of every single finger that he has. If he wants the models, he's got the models, and they're all over age. And it doesn't seem to me that he's ever shown any. I mean, just that's stupid to believe that he would be with a 15-year-old girl. Stupid.
He's not a pedophile, from everything I know, and also my gut.
Okay, I don't know what they have. Is it a picture of Trump with like a young girl? Like, it's not going to be with some, really young girl, but let's say like as a 17-year-old girl. If that had come out, if they have that and that comes out, on any other day, it'd be like, all right, whatever. Everybody knows that Trump was a bit of a playboy when he was younger. He's had multiple wives. He was a man about town when he was younger. And it wouldn't have been a total yawn, but it would have been mostly a yawn. Since President Trump was sworn in, his administration has made enormous progress at a breakneck pace.
Second, not all loyalty tests succeed. Destructive cults can and do fall to pieces when cult leadership oversteps the bounds of what cultists are willing to accept, or because opportunists use the chaos of a loyalty test and purge to stage a coup and take the reins of the cult. Elon Musk appears to be using this moment to pull support from Trump, so it is possible that this whole Epstein fiasco could mark the beginning of Trump's downfall, though at this point I personally don't think that's going to be the case. It does expose Trump to some vulnerabilities, however, and we should leverage those vulnerabilities and try to pull people out of the cult using this as a fulcrum. Third, and probably most importantly, the point of a loyalty test is not to build loyalty, but to test it, to separate true believers from those who might waver. For normal people, it can seem strange for a cult to purposefully push some members out of the fold. After all, wouldn't a cult leader want to have as big of a following as possible? What you have to understand is that cults have their own internal logic. And in order to understand how a cult works, you have to think like a cult leader. Cults frequently benefit from a good purge. From a cult leader's perspective, it's a bit like weeding the garden. Sometimes you have to deliberately sacrifice numbers in exchange for deeper devotion from the followers who remain. It's not always about quantity. Sometimes it's about instilling the quality of fanatic loyalty in your disciples. This all just goes to show how counterintuitive cult practices can be. These people are not normal. And the counterintuitiveness of cult practices is precisely what makes it so difficult for normal people like you and me to identify and avoid cults. Our collective ignorance about cults is socially dangerous. When we're oblivious to cult tactics, it's much easier for us to fall into cults without even realizing it's happening. Cults prey upon our naivety and ignorance, and the less we understand cults as a society, the more of us wind up getting sucked into them. We aren't taught in school to know what a cult is. We aren't trained to recognize and resist techniques of cultish mind control. On the contrary, at least in the USA where I'm from, most of us are indoctrinated into cults and cultish groups by the very institutions which should be shielding us from them. Our schools teach the cult of the founding fathers. Many of our families indoctrinate us into political cults like MAGA or religious cults like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. On social media, our friends want us to join their multi-level marketing cults. Our favorite YouTubers want us to join their influencer cults. Hell, a disturbingly large number of families function as cults in and of themselves, with a malignant mother or father or sibling coercing the rest of the household into toxic and confining little cult units. In America today, we are surrounded by cults, and most of us don't even realize it. It's incredibly easy to misunderstand what's really going on beneath the surface of a cult, and that's largely by design. Cults rely heavily on obfuscation. They use coded language and mind control techniques to slowly and patiently build up influence with followers until they're in too deep and it becomes almost impossible to escape. A cult's social structure is complex, and much of this complexity is hidden from view, even to most members. And things get even more complicated with mass political cults, which are structured quite differently from relatively small and secretive compound-dwelling sects, which you probably think of when you hear the word cult. Mass cults have made it possible to coerce millions of people at once into devotional worship of charismatic political leaders, to the extent that entire nations can become enthralled to a cultish minority. Mass political cults are directly responsible for some of the worst atrocities in human history: tyrannical oppression, unspeakable acts of genocide, and global war. It is absolutely vital that we, the people, understand mass cults so that we can resist and overcome them, and hopefully make sure that they never come about again. For all these reasons, we've decided to make this follow-up video to our last video, in which we hope to provide you with an overview of how cults are structured, with an emphasis on how mass political cults like MAGA build and maintain power. So sit back and pretend to pay attention, because cult class is about to begin. Cult Studies 101. What makes a cult a cult? Cult experts like Amanda Montell and Steve Hassan have pointed out that it can be difficult to distinguish destructive cults from more benign or even constructive social organizations. Hassan, a former member of the Unification Church cult who now writes and speaks on cult awareness and deprogramming, even points out that there are such things as ethical cults, which share many characteristics with destructive cults without actually being harmful or destructive to members of the group. A familiar example of such an ethical cult would be
sports fans. As Amanda Montell writes in her book, Cultish, an ethical group will be upfront about what they believe in, what they want from you, and what they expect from your membership. And leaving comes with few, if any, serious consequences. As Steve Hassan writes, if you say, I found a better band, or I'm not into basketball anymore, the other people won't threaten you. You won't have irrational fears that you'll go insane or be possessed by demons. Unless you say you're a Bears fan, don't you know? Yeah, you gotta be insane or possessed by demons to be a Bears fan.
Defining a cult, therefore, is not as simple as putting together a list of criteria and checking them off. That sort of metaphysical criteria analysis can lead to all sorts of errors. For instance, the Oxford Dictionary offers this definition of a cult based on characteristics: a system of religious veneration and devotion directed toward a particular figure or object. Well, not all cults are religious, and not all cults are devoted to a particular figure or object. Here's another definition from Wikipedia. Cults are social groups which have unusual or often extreme religious, spiritual, or philosophical beliefs and rituals. Well, by that definition, I suppose I'm in a cult, because I belong to the social group of people who have the unusual and extreme philosophical belief that even the best IPAs are mid. Every time you go to the grocery store these days in the USA, it's like all they have is cheap domestic lager and IPAs. It's like Miller High Life, Bud Light, PBR, and then some hoppy bullshit like, I don't know, what's that shit, Ranger? If you're lucky, maybe they have a case of Guinness gathering dust on the back shelf somewhere. I don't understand. Am I the only one who likes a good oatmeal stout or a porter or something every now and then? Dark Beer Gang, sound off in the comments. Rise up, we must unite. Anyway, To properly identify an organization as a cult, we need to look not at characteristics, but at relationships. How does the group's leadership relate to its members? How do members relate to each other? How does the group relate to wider society? The key difference between a healthy or benign social group and a destructive cult comes down to control. Cults are all about mind control, which Steve Hassan defines as the process by which freedom of choice and action is compromised by agents that modify or distort perception and behavioral outcomes. It is neither magical nor mystical, but a process that involves a set of basic social psychological principles. And there we have the key to the whole thing. Cults are organized forms of psychological manipulation and collective abuse, and cultists leverage sociological and psychological patterns and techniques to take control over other people.
A lot of cult leaders are pretty obvious about it, even flamboyant, using hard sell tactics and open hostility to fan the flames of passion in their followers. While others may seem gentle and harmless, using the most subtle forms of manipulation and preying on people who are emotionally neglected and highly susceptible to the false sense of belonging and togetherness that a soft cult can provide.
Steve Hassan's BITE model outlines 4 ways in which cults build up authoritarian control over cult members. Behavior control, limiting autonomy through strict rules, rewards, and punishments. Information control, restricting access to outside perspectives via censorship and propaganda. Thought control, using psychological techniques to shape beliefs and suppress critical thinking. Emotion control, manipulating emotions through love bombing, guilt, and fear to foster dependency. Now, every social organization is going to have some degree of control and exclusivity. It's perfectly valid for healthy groups to have rules and incentives and membership requirements. What makes a group a destructive cult when it comes to control is one-sidedness and deceptive practices. Healthy groups operate on a basis of consensus and consent in power distribution and decision-making. Cults, on the other hand, put all the power in the hands of a single leader or a small group of elite members who dominate the rest of the cult through exploitative and coercive measures. Members often don't even realize they're being manipulated and controlled by those powers that be. Having rules and principles and membership criteria doesn't automatically make a group a destructive cult. A medical association, for example, can have ethical guidelines which members must follow without being a cult. A volunteer organization can give out trophies for member contributions, even if this is technically a means of encouraging certain behaviors. And similarly, a political group can uphold behavioral standards or ideological principles that the group is expected to share. An anti-racist organization, for instance, would not allow racists to join, and that kind of exclusivity and those kinds of standards don't make organizations into cults. Beyond internal dynamics, a group's relationship with wider society matters. Cults often isolate members, viewing the outside world as a threat and demanding members sever ties with outsiders or shun members who dare to leave. With all this in mind, relational patterns begin to emerge. A destructive cult is a social group in which a minority leadership maintains coercive and dominant internal relationships of control over the majority of members. And a destructive cult tends to have hostile and isolationist external relationships with the outside world.
We can't trust anyone. They're all filled with alien ghosts from a distant galaxy.
Beware of foreigners. Beware of minorities. Beware the woke mind poisoners. Beware of all that is different. Our enemies are everywhere. Listen, man, out there, those people, they're on the wrong wavelength, man. The only people who will ever love you are right here. Oh, what's that you say? Mike Ditka is a great man? Yeah, no, I'm afraid we're gonna have to shun you now. Sorry.
But we still have to have more nuance about this. After all, some groups are faced with legitimate external hostility that is beyond their control. Palestinians didn't ask to be persecuted and attacked by powerful nations like Israel and the USA, and LGBTQ+ groups don't want society to be hostile and prejudiced against them. I should also point out that political resistance movements against authoritarian regimes, like the French resistance in World War II, may exhibit some cult-like practices due to dire circumstances. With a resistance movement, strict secrecy and discipline and information control is a prerequisite for survival for members. Faced with Nazi occupation, the French resistance was forced by objective material conditions to adopt cult-like practices to serve the greater good of liberating France. Opportunists don't only exist in cults, after all. There are opportunists in just about every social organization and movement. In political spaces, there are a lot of opportunists and bad actors, and learning how to spot them is crucial for the health and survival of any political movement. For all these reasons, we must consider the historical development and material conditions of a group when trying to determine whether or not it's a destructive cult. Some groups, like the French Resistance, face valid external threats and persecution which justify secrecy and measures of collective discipline and internal control, while other groups fabricate bogus claims of external threats, like MAGA's secret communist deep state narrative or Scientology's evil space aliens.
The psychologists are all controlled by the alien ghosts.
Joe Biden's cabal of secret woke Marxists want to make America communist. The whole world's out to get us, my brethren, because only we know the truth. And that's why we must build a compound.
The bears are a threat to freedom everywhere. We must wage eternal war against Bears fans.
We also need to understand the historical development of an organization before we can decide if it's a cult or not. A lot of groups begin as legitimate organizations and then devolve into cults or get taken over by cult leaders. The People's Temple, led by Jim Jones, wasn't always a cult. At first, the People's Temple did help the poor. They fought for desegregation. It wasn't a bad organization until over time, Jones became increasingly controlling, isolating members, using mind control techniques on them. And this transformation led to the tragic Jonestown massacre where nearly 1,000 people died. Being able to properly identify cults is crucial because misidentification can be harmful in both directions. Obviously, we must be able to identify groups that are cults so we can avoid and resist their destructive schemes. But at the same time, it's equally important that we're able to recognize groups that are not cults because it's common for legitimate organizations to be smeared as cults, especially political and liberation organizations, which often get falsely accused of being cults by reactionaries, which seek to undermine their liberation struggles. And cults frequently use DARVO tactics to deflect criticism toward their critics. DARVO is sort of an advanced technique of I'm rubber, you're glue, whatever you say bounces off of me and sticks to you. It stands for deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. Abusive individuals and cults use DARVO to muddy the waters and to appear innocent while framing victims and critics as the guilty parties. The Church of Scientology often uses DARVO to accuse anti-cult groups of being cults themselves.
I'm the special smart boy with the big special brain. Nobody knows the secret special answers except for me. Everyone else is brainwashed by the alien ghost conspiracy.
Similarly, the MAGA movement smears legitimate LGBTQ+ organizations as cults indoctrinating children with woke ideology or whatever.
We're not in a cult like you. We are the moral populist movement, so of course we're going to be critical of the Trump administration when they do things that are wrong.
And throughout history, socialist movements have been falsely labeled as cults for opposing capitalism and imperialism. And don't get me wrong, there have been socialist cults. We have to be really careful because a lot of opportunists are out there who want to turn our movements into cults. That's why we need to learn these cult resistance techniques. And that's why distinguishing between cults and non-cults is essential for a coherent understanding of our political landscape. Now, let's talk about the different types of cults that are out there. The public perception of cults is that they are small, secretive, little religious sects where everyone personally knows and worships the cult leader. And while there are a lot of cults that fit that description, it's very important to understand that not all cults are small, and these days a huge number of cults are not religious. There are plenty of cults that are massive, with millions of members, and those mass cults have to be structured in a certain way in order to control so many people. We'll describe how that works in just a bit. An organization does not have to be religious to be a cult. You don't have to literally worship someone for them to dominate and control you in a cult formation. Cults can form in pretty much any sort of social group. Wherever people gather together on a regular basis, there is the potential for a cult to form. And that's why it's so important for us all to become cult aware and cult resistant. Most cults are extremely hierarchical and centralized with a single charismatic leader at the center of the structure, but sometimes, like with multi-level marketing rackets, cults can be more decentralized with power distributed through a network of little mini cults that each have their own individual leaders who manage the internal affairs of their downstream cult while paying tribute and honoring the upstream cult leaders. Cult members are often inducted deeper and deeper into the cult through a series of calculated steps. At first, members might be love-bombed by cultists who prey on the alienation and isolation that's so endemic to our modern capitalist society. And as they get sucked deeper and deeper into the cult, they will lose their autonomy and slowly give up their personal identity to earn the approval and emotional rewards that come with adopting the enforced cult identity. Importantly, cult members will face punishment and abuse whenever they stray beyond the bounds of what the cult considers acceptable. And this is where loyalty tests and purges come in. Cult leaders are paranoid and demand absolute loyalty. They have to be paranoid if they want to stay on top. I mean, the people who are most likely to move up into the higher echelons of cult hierarchy tend to be ruthless snakes who crave power in their own right. If you're running a cult and you don't want to get cooed, you need to develop coup-proofing techniques. In a smaller cult, this can be simple enough, as a cult leader can exert direct control and coercion over each individual follower.
Listen, Emily, I know you. You know me. You have to trust me. We have to trust each other. It's us against the world.
But once a cult grows to a large enough size, this becomes impossible. The leaders of mass cults with hundreds of thousands, even millions of members have to find ways of keeping all their subordinates in line without being able to exert direct control over each individual member. In order to maintain control over a mass cult, you must develop factional counterbalancing in your cult. This technique has been used for centuries by authoritarian leaders to maintain power over massive organizations, and it revolves around encouraging competition and faction building by underlings. Once a cult becomes so large that a single leader cannot possibly personally manage the whole thing, subcults, proxy cults have to form. Hierarchy and factional schisms become crucial for the cult leader to maintain a grip on the reins of power. Having various factions vying for the charismatic leader's favor prevents any one faction from gaining too much power and threatening the leader, essentially creating a balance of power.
I need you to get your people in line, Michael. If you can't do the job, I got a dozen guys lined up begging for the kind of opportunity I've given you. Get your house in order, or I'll replace you with someone else who can.
Adolf Hitler was a master of counterbalancing. He set up the administrative organs of the Third Reich and the Nazi Party such that various factions and organizations, subcults and subcult leaders were set against each other. Hitler's minions viciously fought against each other and vied for Hitler's attention and approval, and Hitler actively encouraged this behavior. The Nazis even had a term for this, the Führer principle. According to the Führer principle, power flows down from the leader and responsibility is owed back up. The Führer principle creates an institutional culture of backstabbing and subterfuge in which competing personalities are constantly scheming against each other to grasp for power, to undermine each other, and to keep each other in check. Nazi leaders like Himmler, Goebbels, and Goering all established subcults of their own. The Gestapo and the Brown Shirts and the SS and various other factions served as subcults and proxy cults, and each of these smaller cults ultimately existed to serve the grand cult of personality of Adolf Hitler. In this manner, Hitler doesn't have to lift a finger to keep the various factions which he commands in check. As soon as one underling starts to gain too much personal power, the other factions will step in to quash them back down or eliminate them altogether. The downside of this culture of paranoia and distrust is that the most sinister and malicious sorts of people end up in your inner circle. There's always a lingering threat of a subcult or a jealous subordinate attempting a coup, and this creates a demand for assurance that members of the cult are completely loyal to the Führer at the top of the pyramid. This is why cults have loyalty tests and purges, especially once they grow to a mass scale. And this is why Donald Trump is so deeply concerned with loyalty. It's why loyalty is his top criterion for picking cabinet members and other leaders in his administration. And it's why he had Doge interrogate members in important organizations like the State Department and the FBI to ensure that employees maintained a base level of loyalty to Trump if they wanted to keep their jobs. At this point, Trump has consolidated his power. He controls the MAGA cult, he controls the Republican Party, and it's becoming increasingly clear that he controls the entire state apparatus of the USA with fewer and fewer exceptions. At this stage of the game, Trump is no longer concerned with quantity of support. He doesn't want to build numbers. He doesn't need the masses to love him. He needs to maintain strict control over his cults, his subcults, so that they in turn will make sure that the masses obey his authority. And that is why Trump must regularly conduct loyalty tests and purges within the MAGA cult. He needs to make sure that he has surrounded himself with people who serve his interests and not their own. And that's why this whole situation with the Epstein cover-up that we talked about in our last video serves as an effective loyalty test and purge operation for Trump's MAGA cult. It kills two birds with one stone. Trump can see clearly who is truly loyal enough to publicly abandon their own public principles and humiliate themselves by defending this farcical fumbling of the Epstein case. And secondly, it keeps all the proxy cults and thought leaders who answer to Trump from gaining too much power and control. If Alex Jones and Kash Patel have to publicly prostrate themselves to defend Trump through thick and thin in this situation, it prevents them from garnering too much blind obedience from their own subcult followers. And if Dan Bongino and Pam Bondi are going after each other's throats to try and blame each other for the fallout from the Epstein cover-up, it weakens both of them and keeps Trump in a position of commanding authority over the cult. Now, keep in mind, this does not have to be intentional activity. Trump doesn't have to be some brilliant puppet master pulling the strings and orchestrating all of these events. Factional counterbalancing is more or less an automatic process. Once you've built up your cult with all the proper structures in place, all of this infighting, loyalty testing, and purging happens more or less on its own. All Trump really has to do is keep playing the part of strongman, making adjustments here and there, and making sure that none of his minions ever gains enough personal power to threaten his status as the Führer.
Oh shit, we just had a major leak. This could make me look bad. I'm gonna need to plant the idea in Michael's head that if he pins the blame on Jacob, then I'll give him a nice, fat, juicy reward. And I'll tell Jacob to do the same thing to Michael. That'll take the heat off of me and keep those two numbskulls busy for a while.
The cult rabbit hole goes a lot deeper than this. And the more I learn about cults, the more disturbing they are to me. Because cults run in a way that is counter to everything I believe in and everything I want for humanity. I want to live in a world in which we all work together, we learn to trust each other, and we all have the opportunity to have our voices heard through well-designed democratic social structures. Cults and cult leaders want total control, complete domination, and unwavering loyalty from their followers. There's way more information that I'd like to share with you, but this video is already getting pretty long. If you found this analysis interesting or helpful and you'd like to learn more about how we try to understand the world from a material basis by exploring relationships and development patterns in order to gain a comprehensive and historical perspective, you can check out our free ebook at banyanhouse.org/shop. This book will teach you the philosophical framework of dialectical materialism, and we think it's a really great system of critical thinking that will help you to identify and avoid political cults. Oh, and by the way, part 2 on historical materialism, which builds on the ideas of part 1 and talks more about social structures in human society, it's almost finished. So join our free Patreon tier if you'd like to be informed when that launches in the very near future.
If this video touched your heart, then be sure to subscribe. Maybe share this video with other potential cult members. Other people who might need to hear these ideas. And be sure to compete for my attention and affection with each other in the comments. Maybe see if you can form a little non-compete proxy cult of your own. And between you and me, please don't tell the others about this, but you're my favorite viewer. Nobody understands you the way that I do.